Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Ask Us responses from week 5 for Education for All, Inclusion, Disability and Diversity. I'm sitting in my office here in Cape Town at the university, and I'm hoping that this can be a very informal kind of discussion and to take the opportunity to think of speaking to you directly about the kind of questions that you've submitted. So what I've done is I've looked at the questions that were submitted on the Ask Us, and I've looked at them in various themes, and I hope to address some of these themes in this session. So there was in your discussion quite a lot of concern around teacher education, and I agree that teacher education is absolutely central to everything that we do about inclusion. And some of the issues that were raised, Mary Russell spoke about a model of education where you would have a generalist teacher who's trained in the basics about inclusion, who would be more readily available than a specialist teacher who might deal with more complex and rare issues, and who would be specialist and would serve a wider number of groups. And this has been, I think, taken up quite a lot of places. I think there's an agreement that all teachers need to know about inclusion. All general teachers need to know about it, and they need to be able to implement inclusion in their classrooms so that they are able to cater for diversity. So this means being able to differentiate the curriculum, as Emma and Sindiswa have spoken about, being able to adapt your assessment, your the way that you engage the children, and also how you actually present the information to them. So that would be your basic teacher, but that doesn't do away with the need for a specialized teacher. Say, for example, in teaching a child with a visual impairment to use Braille. That's a very specialized job that requires a good knowledge of issues that affect blind children, as well as the literacy in Braille, as well as understanding of the different ways in which blind children gain their literacy. Of course, once they have actually acquired the Braille, and once they become competent, there becomes a possibility for more education in the mainstream, and with the support of specialist teachers, they could actually then be in more mainstream classes. So that's one thing that came up around teacher education. And Boran Mahmoud also asked this: why is special child education care not included in teachers' courses? So he asks that why doesn't society actually cater for these children? And I think that perhaps those responses to Mary would help to address that we're needing to look at general teacher training as well as at specialized teachers training. And the teacher needs to be attuned to diversity. So, for example, if you can ensure that a classroom includes children of different gender, race, culture, and language, then the chances of them being able to include children with disability are better. So that's your generalist teacher, and then your more specialized competencies. So that's the one area that was raised, was around teacher education. But then the other one that came up was around specific disabilities. And this is quite an interesting one. And in fact, it is related quite a lot to the point that we've just made about teacher education. A lot of teachers coming to inclusive education are very concerned about the specific disabilities that the children in their class might have. So, for example, Sandra Eleanor Derma-Buffy is talking about a child with ADD, and what are the specific things that can be done about that? Audrey Combrink talks about how hard it is for her to cope in her classroom with a severely cognitively impaired child. And Sabine Bilal asks how to include autistic children and children with Down syndrome in a regular class. And all of these are very valid and important questions, and you would need to really address these. But I think that bearing in mind what we just said about creating an inclusive class, creating an inclusive environment, that's the starting point. How are you adapting to meet diversity within your classroom? Are there different ways that you can present the material? Are there different ways that children are able to engage with the material that they are capable of doing? And are there different ways of assessing their learning? So, for example, a child with Down syndrome might need to have the material presented to them in a very concrete way because of the cognitive limitations. So something like counting, and that would need to be done with concrete objects. And their practice might also be with the concrete objects, and the assessment actually seeing whether they know their numbers would be similarly with concrete objects, but trying at the same time to get them up to be more abstract and to generalize more. So when I think, what I'm saying is we start off with a basic level of diversity, we adapt the curriculum, and we look at each child's capabilities. But I think there's a caution here that we must be aware of, and that is we must continue to have high expectations. It's not enough just to have a child in your class, say, for example, with, as Audrey points out, the child in her class is actually, he just wants to do the same activities as other children, but he just sits there and stares at them. I think you'll agree that's not good enough. So what I would suggest to Audrey is to actually develop goals for that particular child around what his needs are. It seems that he wants to participate, he wants to be part of the group. Now, how can you build that up to the next level where he's actually making some kind of progress? So I think this can be hard sometimes for teachers who are committed and dedicated and who want to do the best they can and help their children to achieve. But and they want all children to be able to achieve all the goals in the class. But you can actually adapt your goals, and you're going to need to adapt your goals if you are going to be able to be inclusive. So to have a child, to go back to Sabine's question, a child with autism or Down syndrome in your class, you're going to have to adapt the goals of what you expect that child to achieve, because it's going to be very difficult to expect that child to be achieving the same as other children in the class. So I think that's a trick. And then your issue is, how do you actually allow the child to reach those goals within the context of what the other children are doing? I think the other big area that has come up is really on school systems and managing schools. And for example, the one that Elisa McCarthy brought up was, if you actually are doing adaptations and you are changing your school in some way, is it possible that that change might help some children but disadvantage others? And I would suggest that it most often probably works the other way around. So if you are catering to diversity by making a change such as having a lot of visual material in the classroom because of a child with hearing impairment, that often benefits other children as well. For example, it can benefit the child who has a second language learning problem or the child with an intellectual disability. That adaptation actually benefits. So I would suggest that adaptations often benefit the rest of the class rather than disadvantage them. But it is something that obviously one needs to be aware of, and that awareness comes from being aware of the diversity that's in your classroom and the recognition that no two children are the same. Other things around school systems. Zoe asks, what support schools in other countries get from outside agencies? And in order to answer this question, I went to ask Vanessa from Inclusive Education South Africa what they feel about it and what they experience in our context. And what they said is that in South Africa, a few districts have inclusive education outreach teams, and the specialists are based at special schools as resource centres. But these teams are limited in terms of human resources, but they do try to support inclusive schools. And then they emphasize the role of NGOs in providing much needed guidance and support to parents, and in some cases to teachers as well. But unfortunately, there's a question was, are they actually monitored? And Inclusive Education South Africa points out that teachers in schools are not monitored and evaluated on the basis of their inclusive practice. So what they are doing is advocating for performance indicators to be included in teacher performance. So I think that raises an important issue is even where school systems are supposed to be inclusive, how do we actually monitor whether they are and hold them accountable to that? There's another question here, which is, can an inclusive school open without the support of government? And that's what Loretta Beer, you'd have to forgive me if I pronounce names incorrectly. It's people from all over the world in countries that I don't even know what languages are spoken there. So please forgive me if it's pronounced incorrectly. And she asked, does inclusion have to happen with the help of government? And I would suggest that no, because the principle of inclusion is really about how do we accommodate diversity within a classroom? How do we acknowledge the individuality of each child and tailor teaching and learning to their particular learning needs? So that to me is about inclusion. I understand that if you're talking about inclusion of children with specific disabilities, that might be a little bit different, because some government systems might have schools for the deaf, schools for the blind, and so on. And they might not be permitted to go to the regular school. But I don't see that kind of system as actually being against implementing inclusion in your own school with the children that are already there. I think if we really wanted to think about it, we could say that most children have special needs. And by special needs, I mean individual needs. And the extent to which we can see learners as individuals and the extent to which we can be inclusive like that is not something that any government can control, but that's really to do with very good teaching, is to be able to see the children as individuals. And then there was a question also in school systems about whether schools that accommodate children with disabilities get more financial support. And this is a problem because sometimes any money for children with disabilities or special educational needs gets tied up in a special education system, and then it's difficult to support children in the mainstream. So there is a move now to actually look at what the support needs are of that particular child and what funding is needed for that particular child, and then to ensure that the funding follows the child rather than the place. So in other words, the funding should go to the school where the child goes to school, rather than going to special schools which then have children coming into it. So I'm sure this would vary from one country to the next, and we'd love to hear from others of you that have different ways of doing it in your countries. And as we get to the end of this course, and I must say it's actually been wonderful sharing this with you, and the participation and the enthusiasm has been really fantastic. And I'm very grateful for the many kind words that you've actually shared with us about how useful it is. And that's what we really wanted more than anything else. So as we get to the end, Alex Toe and Claire Ozell have voiced a need to perhaps continue working together and to maybe share resources and ideas and to continue to support each other beyond the life of this course. So we've actually been in email contact with Claire, and we will Skype with her. And what we've got so far is we do have a Facebook page that was created by the first group that did this MOOC. And I'll put the link up on this talk afterwards. So you can join that Facebook page. It's called the Study Group for Inclusive Education Future Learn course. It's got some lovely links to various material and lots of passionate people who really care about education of all children. So I think that is a nice place to go. But Claire said what I think is also needed is resources organized in a meaningful way. She points out that Facebook is useful for accessing what has just been posted. However, I can't find something that someone shared 2 hours ago. Too much traffic. So we're going to work with her to this purpose to try and set up something around resources. And Ike has suggested the development of a resource around what he would name sharing inclusive education practices, assets and challenges from different contexts. And then it would be a matter of categorizing the information. So it's organized as people send information, and then people can just continue with discussions. So we'd be very interested to hear from you about anybody who would like to join on that and any other ideas you have. And then, of course, once it gets going, we would like you to participate in that site and to carry on with the learning that goes around inclusive education, which I can assure you never stops. You're always learning something new, and that's the wonderful challenge on it. So on that note, I'd like to thank you very much for your participation, and good luck for the last week. And I hope that our efforts to continue beyond this will work out, and that we will still be able to be in touch. And who knows, maybe to meet some of you in the flesh one day. I would hope so. Thank you.